Welcome back to the special bonus episode of the 7 most important tools for modern WordPress developers. This is special bonus number 8, not because I'm saving the best for last or anything. This is just a tool that kind of sits outside of WordPress and is a little bit different, a little controversial, but I do think it's pretty important and something to keep your eye on. So, tool number 8 today is pair programming, artificial intelligence, LLMs, AI, GitHub Copilot, ChatGPT, all of those sorts of tools. Whether you like it or not, they're definitely becoming a part of the developer's job to kind of keep an eye on. Not because I think we're all going to get replaced by AI pair programmers, but I do think that they provide a decent amount of value. The way I describe it is that I don't think they're saving us from spending any time thinking about stuff, but they are saving us time from typing things. So generally, they will give you mediocre to good code, but most of the time, what's really helpful is just times where you need to write a bunch of code that is maybe a little bit formulaic or something like that. They're usually pretty quick at catching on to that and helping you speed through that process. So, if you're not trying it out, I definitely recommend it. The thing is that you just cannot take code that comes from a tool like GitHub Copilot and just use it. You really have to read it and test it because it is more often than not the best code. Sometimes it'll show you something in a really cool way that you didn't think about, and sometimes it'll just go off the rails. But overall, I've found it to be a bit more of a benefit than a waste of time. So let's just look at the kind of different ways you can use something like GitHub Copilot for WordPress development. So I have my code editor here. I'll give you one quick example that I do, which is sometimes when I'm starting a new plugin, I will use this where you ask it and I will say, scaffold a WordPress plugin. And it generally does a pretty good job of getting all those plugin headers. I don't have to go find it. I don't have to go look for it. If you're in the middle of a project, it typically grabs things like your name or something like that, or the name of the file. Like it gets pretty smart about that stuff and accept those changes. And so that's something where it's boilerplate, it's scaffolding. It's not something I couldn't go copy and paste from somewhere else, but it's kind of nice that it does it for me. And then I can go in and I can tweak it, I can change it, that sort of thing. So sending little commands about, scaffold this, register this, that's super handy. Another example is sometimes you can start naming a function and it'll finish it for you. And WordPress, because it's open source and because there's so much open source code for WordPress available, it generally does a pretty good job with handling WordPress and scaffolding out these sorts of things. So I might write a function like add analytics to header, and then I'll wait and it's going to give me a suggestion. And then if I hit enter, it's going to know exactly which action to add it to. So, like I said, you got to test this sort of stuff, but like this is a piece of code that I've written 100 times. I don't really want to sit here and write it every time. The fact that it's going to write it all for me is super handy. Another example is I do use a tool for commenting my code, but sometimes it's nice to not have to write everything out. So I'll use a tool like that that'll kind of scaffold the function of the doc block for my code. But then sometimes I'll wait and I'll let Copilot, as you can see here, make a suggestion and I'll accept it. And it's sometimes pretty good at reading the function and sometimes it reads a different function and names it. But overall, little things like that I could just type out, but you can wait a minute. And your mileage will vary. Sometimes it's slow enough to where you're just better off starting to type than just waiting for it. And sometimes you wait for it and you get it and it's garbage. So, it's not perfect, but like the fact of how quickly it's improved since I've started even using it, I can clearly see that the potential is there. And then the third thing that I think is super handy is sometimes you might get a chunk of code that's a little bit confusing. And so you can actually highlight a section of code and you can use commands. And there's this kind of sidebar chat. This is VS Code. Other tools use other things, but this is VS Code using GitHub Copilot. And you can actually ask it to explain, a chunk of code and explain what it's doing. And so it'll actually write out this whole paragraph, tell you what the parameters are, tell you that sort of stuff. This is kind of a simple example of, a piece of code, but sometimes you inherit something from another developer or you're debugging some plugin that is not working right. And sometimes it's helpful to have it kind of put into plain English what you want to do. And lastly, I'll say my last tip for GitHub Copilot is do not expect it to do a lot. Expect it to do little pieces. You still need to have a big picture idea of what functionality you're trying to write. People will say, oh, I asked ChatGPT to make me a plugin that does this, but those examples are generally pretty simplistic. Once you're actually writing real complicated code, it makes it a lot easier to give it very small, discrete instructions and think your way through it. And it's sort of just like having an assistant who's just going to type faster for you, because it's not always perfect. For example, in this version here, I can already see that the way that they called in the dependency array is actually not the way we did. And we looked at that in a previous video. So we know that this is actually not going to work if those aren't the only dependencies. So like I said, it's not always perfect. It doesn't excuse you from writing code or thinking. It just makes life a little bit easier. And I think as it gets better, it's definitely something to keep your eye on, especially if you're doing WordPress development. So I really want to thank you for sticking through me with this series. If you liked it, please just send it to anybody else. Share this information as widely as possible. Nothing would make me happier than more people seeing this and realizing that there's a lot of value in learning modern WordPress development, and there's a lot of opportunities for people who know it well. And I just want to thank you again. And if you have any questions or want to see deep dives, check out my YouTube, where I do much longer deep dives into a lot of these topics. And if you need tutorials or help or consulting on any of these things, just reach out and let's see if we can get more education out there for modern WordPress developers like you and me.